There's this wonderful exercise that we do uh, in some of our workshops where we talk about your first day at work or your first week at work, and just to cast your mind back to that and the first engagement that you had with a person in an organization and how they actually spoke to you, dealt with it, etc. And perhaps you were in that environment. It's an induction environment. You put your hand up and asked a question, and people laughed at you, or people pointed at you, or people said, "Don't ask a silly question like that." And that exercise is a really powerful one because everyone's been through that, where they've been admonished, or they've had a question shut down, or people have kind of sniggered a little behind their backs about the questions that they've asked. And it's at that point that you lose the true value of creativity in human beings, because you never want to put your hand up again.
I also love this thinking that it's a mindset, and what you talked about just now is how this actually extends to the people inside the companies, and how if you can encourage people to think at it, you don't necessarily have to take your company into a new industry. You could just pull in new people into your company, and if you encourage that thinking and you embrace it and reward it, you could potentially get some of that challenger mindset inside your company without actually having to change industries or like mix things up completely. Can you talk a little bit about this idea of sort of like mindsets of businesses and people, and how that can help them to build better brands and to communicate more effectively?
When we don't have the luxury of being able to hire in these kind of times, actually helping people reset themselves, reset their mindsets, redirect their intention and their desires. It is possible, absolutely possible. I think it's a natural thing in categories, and it happens with people as well inside businesses who operate in those categories, is that you kind of have a work self and a home self, right? And people come to work with their work self. It's like their mask of how they look and operate and you know present themselves in a work environment. And that comes from somewhere, right? That comes from organizations who have not built kind of self-developing organizations, but built a lot of rules and constraints that actually create a system of, this is how things are done around here, the conventions. And so if you're going to show up and win in this environment and be successful, you have to look like that, act like that, speak like this. And actually, that's not people's true self, right? Their true self is how they behave every day with people that they're comfortable with, as family, I guess, and and actually creativity and innovative thinking comes from tapping your true values and your true capability and your belief in them. And I think when people then walk into organizations and start to conform, basically that depletes the ability to be able to uh, you know think in new ways, and create category leaps. There's this wonderful exercise that we do uh, in some of our workshops where we talk about your first day at work or your first week at work, and just to cast your mind back to that and the first engagement that you had with a person in an organization and how they actually spoke to you, dealt with it, etc. And perhaps you were in that environment, even if it's an induction environment. You put your hand up and asked a question, and people laughed at you, or people pointed at you, or people said, "Don't ask a silly question like that." And that exercise is a really powerful one because everyone's been through that, where they've been admonished, or they've had a question shut down, or people have kind of sniggered a little behind their backs about the questions that they've asked. And it's at that point that you lose the true value of creativity in a human being,
Mm.
because you never want to put your hand up again. One doesn't have to jump to the idea of bringing new people in, because actually everybody has this capability within them, right? If one is to truly believe in the potential of humanity, everyone in this world has a challenger in them. And it's about how one, as a leader of an organization or a team, can help bring that out in people to help them be more authentically themselves, to help them have a more ambitious purpose, or align their own individual values as a person to the organization direction and strategy.
The people in a company are more brand builders than anything else you do. More so
Yeah.
than your marketing, more so than your, maybe in the digital world, your product, could be like, the experience of your product could be second next to those people. But
Yes.
there's very much an experience that you feel when you meet someone from a company, and I think those are the kind of interactions that imprint on those people and tell them how to behave.
That's the power of challenger thinking, is to rather carve out deeper, more meaningful relationships with people who truly get you, rather than have a whole bunch of meaningless relationships which uh, aren't really following you for the right reasons.
I think that's both true for customers and for your staff. Like, I think having those deep relationships with the people inside your organization is really important. And I think we've
Yeah.
seen it play out a lot now in this sort of COVID time, is the businesses that have been resilient, the businesses that have grown despite what's happening, the businesses that have completely changed their service offering, is because the internals of that business, the people inside there, and the understanding of the purpose of it and the drive of it were so embedded that they were able to survive, even though everything around them was almost on fire. EdCon went away, and in theory, EdCon shouldn't have gone away, because they had all of the properties, that were paid off decades ago. They had staff spanning the whole country. They had exclusive deals signed with brands. But every time you went into an EdCon and you spoke to an individual, like, hey, I'm looking for this, like, I
Mm.
found that whole experience to be so deeply off-putting that it actually stopped me going into an Edgar's. Like, Edgar's became like my last possible place. And it wasn't that the brand was bad or the communication was bad or the advertising was bad, but going in there, I didn't want to interact with those people because I could feel how little they wanted to actually be
Yeah.
there.
You can become, a magnet, not a loud hailer. You can be the person that people want to be around. You can be the brand people want to be around. I think there are little things that can be done, to actually be more genuine and human as an organization and as people within organizations.
I think Burger King is living that so well at the moment. I mean, they released an ad. It
Yeah.
started in South America, which was, the headline of it was "Eat McDonald's."
Yes.
And then the copy beneath it was like, well, of course we want you to eat our product, but there's also McDonald's and KFC, and all of these people in our industry are suffering right now. So please just go out and eat anyone. Like, and I think it's such a bold move of a company to do, but it shows people that they're willing to think about others and not just themselves. And ultimately, it is a selfish act because it's an advert, and I'm sitting here talking about it. But in the end of the day, the essence of what they were trying to say was exactly that.
That reminds me of what we would call the original challenger brand, right? Which is Avis, and that goes back to kind of 1962 when. If you talk about authentic identity, that was probably is probably a brilliant example, because the headline in that ad read, "When you're only number two, you have to try harder or else." And that's like, okay, we're not number one. We're not going to pose. We're not going to purport. We're not going to say we're better. We're actually just going to tell people what it is.
So what's it like, Jerry Maguire? It's like, why
Yes.
should I choose you? It's like, because you're my only choice. Like, I don't have anybody else. So I will fight for you. I will kill someone for you. I will do everything for you because you are my one and only opportunity, which most people would shy away from saying. But if you do have that opportunity to say it, it does make for a compelling argument. One of the things you sort of expressed to me that you're passionate about trying to get rid of is this idea of a lack of speed in how organizations change or how they shift. Like, can you talk a little bit about why that is, and what people could think about as they're trying to reimagine? Because I know everyone's probably, when they're listening to this, are about to go into strategy sessions. They're about to start thinking about 21, 22, 23. How would you frame this to them so that they can not fall back into the same patterns that have got them to this point?
Planning has taken on a whole different meaning, right, in the world today, because we historically, in a kind of post-war, it came out of the kind of post-war era of okay, we need to build stuff in a structured way. We need to have a long-term strategy and a clear structure and clear operating models and clear outcomes, etc., etc. And that kind of typical top-down approach to strategy development has been very ingrained in how we think as organizations and how we then act and behave as people. And with the kind of advent of businesses being kind of expected, quite rightly, to have more of a social conscience and actually contribute more to society, and concepts of purpose and shared value and all that good stuff. Actually, you can't do that top-down, long-term planning wise. You can't. I mean, you actually have to be able to listen, but really listen. Not say you're listening through like annual tracking research, but actually be in touch and be completely connected with the sentiment and the empathy, the feelings and the attitudes of your customers and your people inside your organization all the time. Therefore, the kind of idea of annual planning, gone. Like the idea of 6-month planning. I mean, how do we organize ourselves to be able to, and maybe promote self-organization, right, within companies, so that people actually just do stuff anyway because it's important, but it's guided by a more overarching, impetus or intention, which has emotional energy behind it. And so that frames your decision making, not the KPIs that are linked to a percentage, that are linked to a market research data point, which is you only get every 6 months. I would encourage people to rethink how they plan, create looser structures of smaller teams, give guardrails to people, but give less rules to people in those teams, and more liberation to be able to make their own decisions, which come from their own sense of self, because then you're promoting authentic identity.
The best guardrail is when companies are very clear on what their purpose is, what their organizational purpose is, because then it gives everyone at the company a sense. If they know what it is and they understand it, you just need to be able to answer to me, how is this heading us in that direction? Like that's your guardrail. You tell me how in your department, in your world, in your objectives, how are you driving us in that direction? Because I think that is the unifier of all of these different things.
Well, I'm not sure if you know the book Powerful by Patty McCord, but she was the ex human resource head at Netflix, and they've got a number of values, but they had 2 core principles. I think they might have called them 2 core values, called freedom and responsibility. And the way that those play off each other is quite powerful. So you give people all the freedom that they need, but then they must take all the responsibility as well at the same time. So their kind of financial stroke expense policy is do what's good for Netflix. Their maternity policy is do what's good for your baby and for yourself. And so have all the freedom you need, but you have to hold yourself accountable for delivery. And in doing that, they also put in things like there is no such thing as a B team player. If you're a B team, if your performance is B level, we will say a very quick and hasty but very nice goodbye, and that's it. So it's quite clear. There are no grey lines in that, and those sound like rules, but they're not.